NFR podcast.
So it's the 10th anniversary of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Man, I can't believe it's already 10 years it's out. I remember when I first started listening to hip hop, one of the biggest names I feel as if were in my rotation was actually Kanye. And surprisingly enough, the year I really started getting into hip hop was 10 years ago, around 2010. So this album has a load of replay value for me. There's a bunch of bangers. So Lou, I'm going to welcome you into the episode, man. I want to ask you straight off the bat, what does My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy mean to you, and why do you think you enjoy it so much?
I just feel like it's one of the most talked about albums in the hip hop community.
Yeah.
And it's just because it's something that no one expected to get out of Kanye during that time. And the context of in which this album was released is so important as to what he ended up rolling out finally. And I'm excited to talk about this album with a very special guest. You guys may know him as Tilly or Kanye's lawyer. Man, welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up, guys? Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, bro. So I'm going to start you off like this, man. Introduce yourself. And I think I asked this to Colin last episode from Team Dreamville, but I want to ask you the same question because it was a great intro. Explain what Kanye means to you, and maybe a bit more in depth, what does My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, have to do with your hip hop listening?
Okay, sure. So I'm Tilly. I run basically just a Kanye page on Twitter. I started during quarantine, didn't have anything to do. Started making really in-depth threads, and those kind of took off a little bit, got me a nice following. So I'm at the point where I get invited to amazing shows like this. And as far as what Kanye means to me, it's he's just such this creative mind, and he really reminds everybody that you should never stop creating. You should never let the world try to take that inner child, like he talks about on My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. You should never let the world try to take the inner child from you. So more specifically, that's what I enjoy about My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Just how amazing all the songs are. There's like Chris Rock said, there's something for everybody on this album.
There is. And I mean, going back to what I was saying before, the context in which, this album, was created upon is phenomenal, and it's breathtaking just because he was at the lowest point in his career. 2 years prior to the release of this, his mother passed away. He was going through a lot of, trauma with that. He started to develop a bit of a drinking problem. And of course, there was the infamous 2009 VMA Taylor Swift incident where, he rushed on stage, interrupted her acceptance speech, and, there was a media frenzy, essentially.
Absolutely. And I remember watching that live, man. It was such a crazy, I remember where I was actually. I think I was still in elementary school at the time, and I remember going through YouTube, and this is when YouTube was still super organic and stuff, and they weren't pushing a bunch of bullshit on the timeline and whatever it is. And I remember Kanye West interrupts Taylor Swift's acceptance speech, and I'm like, holy shit, this is the first time this has happened. And I go through it, and I remember thinking to myself, what stage, who is Kanye West? Because I feel as if that's the first time I ever got a taste of Kanye West and his sort of personality. And I respect him for that, low key. The whole incident I feel as if is, a bit overblown. Yes, it was an acceptance speech, and yes, you kind of have to be respectful towards someone to do it. But, the scrutiny he got and the blast that he got from the community was way overblown. I mean, automatically people knew that he had mental health issues. People knew that he had, the drinking problem and all that kind of stuff was going on in his life.
I don't feel like it was caused by, any of those issues. I feel like he just wanted to speak out because the Grammys have been, not properly representing hip hop music or just, music of a certain culture for so much time. And, he literally got up on stage and said Beyonce had one of the best music videos of all time.
Absolutely.
Which that video was fantastic. So I want to ask you, Tilly, do you think that, that interruption was out of line?
You know what? I can't speak on how award shows like that were perceived at the time. So I'm not sure if it was out of line then, but I know that if that happened now, that probably wouldn't have been as big of a deal, because you look at people in the hip hop community, at least, don't really respect the big award shows anymore. When Macklemore's album beat Good Kid, Mad City at the Grammys, it kind of started corroding away.
Fucking joke.
At the reputation of these award shows. But I would say if that wasn't the case back then, it could have been a little bit out of line. Not saying he wasn't wrong, but I don't think he should have done it. but hey, it gave us one of the greatest albums of all time. So I'm happy that it did.
Absolutely. And a great part about this album is I feel as if it's a very big shift in Kanye's career. We saw that 808s was a bit more vulnerable and that he was really more
experimental.
It was more experimental. And not only that, but I feel as if it was the first time where he sort of didn't give a fuck what people had to say about his music at any point, right? Like he completely derailed from his original sound. We got similar sounds, let's say, in College Dropout and then Late Reg. Then he went on to anthem music with Graduation, and then you got something completely out of the blue with 808s. And then you go to 2010, you get My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, which is completely different from anything that we've ever seen in hip hop. And I feel as if I want to start off the episode and talking about My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy with that statement. It is the most diverse hip hop album that we've probably ever gotten, to that level and that extent. So let's talk about the making of it. So as we mentioned before, 2 years prior, Kanye did lose his mom. He did release 808s before this, and not only that, but we were talking about how scrutinized he was. So all of the flair and all of the arrogance through this album was projected. It was very strong. We saw it. Do you feel as if it was a product maybe of, him going through all of that was able, that we were able to get that Kanye? Or do you think it was something that he was planning creatively for a while?
I don't think that's what he was planning on doing, because if you look about how he talks about that album now, he says that My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is nowhere near the project that 808s and Yeezus was. So I feel like he was transitioning into this kind of more experimental stuff, not making the music that people wanted him to make. But with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, I personally feel like he was, like you said, at the lowest point in his career, and he had something to prove. That's why he went all out for this album.
Yeah, and people were saying that his career was essentially over. People had shunned him, and people didn't know if we would ever get another Kanye album, period. So what he did is he kind of went into self-exile. He traveled to Japan, he traveled to Rome, just to, gain some culture and its inspiration for MBDTF. And then he went to Hawaii in 2009, where the actual recording of the album would take place.
The famous Hawaii recordings, man. You hear so many stories of there, and the type of process that he was going through. I believe he did flew everyone out that was on the album. So Kid Cudi was there, Nicki Minaj was there, Rick Ross was there. I can't confirm Rick Ross, actually. Don't quote me on that.
Rick Ross was there. But sure he was.
Okay, he was there. I'm sorry. I don't have the exact context of the list and everything. But he invited a lot of people just because I feel as if he wanted people to be in their element when creating this album. And it's one of the strongest points of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is that feature list. Without that feature list, man, you're not getting a lot of these songs, and it's to a point where you look at the feature list and you're like, how fucking stacked could this actually get? And then, obviously he did that all in Hawaii, and then he released the whole album. Not only that, but I want to talk about a bit of a transition point between that 2008 to 2010 when he did drop My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. That is when he started interning, for the stumble of words, at Fendi. I think it was Fendi with Virgil Abloh. So he was also starting to get into his more luxury side. He started making exclusive designs. He was interning there. And I feel as if that also had a big presence on his album, and we see that luxury talk. We see that sort of sparkle, that flair come out in this album. So Tilly, let me ask you this. If Kanye didn't have that side of fashion to him, or he didn't have that flair to him, with the clothes and, all the fashion statements, do you think we would have gotten My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy in the way that we got it in, or do you think that has effect on it?
I mean, that's a really good question. I haven't thought about it in that way, but when you look at the grandness of the album and the way that he talks about it, is when he was making the album, he wasn't comparing himself to anybody alive. He was like, I'm looking at the pyramids, I'm looking at Michelangelo, I'm looking at the past greats, and I'm going to try to make something that stacks up to them. So I feel like definitely the fashion could have played into that and making something bigger than music, just creating pure art with the album.
Yeah, and what's crazy is that, he had a whole process, which RZA describes as starting off by planning out his day, working out, doing charity work, and then going to the studio where he would lock himself in and have sleepless nights. He would only sleep, let's say, for 90 minutes in one chair certain nights, just so that he can put all his energy, into recording. And it's just crazy to see, what his work ethic was. And apparently, I don't know if this was just during certain portions of the recording, but he would make all the engineers walk into the studio with suits on. Like that was a requirement for them to be wearing suits. That just shows the level of focus and the vision that Kanye had to, you know, execute a fantastic album.
Yeah, not only that, but he had to set up that aesthetic so people were in that mode. And another crazy stat, it is actually one of the highest budgets. I think it's actually the highest. It's the most expensive album ever made.
It's one of the most expensive albums ever made.
I think he got a budget of like $3 million from Def Jam.
Yeah.
$3 million to make an album, man. That's crazy. So I guess that's where we see, you know, all the expensive features. That's where we see the whole rollout. I mean, the rollout was almost seamless. I mean, I remember from a consumer standpoint more than anything, because I was young, right? Like I didn't have any knowledge in marketing, or I didn't know about rollouts. I didn't know about these triggers and stuff. So looking at it from a consumer back then, it was crazy because Kanye was always in your face. Kanye was everywhere you looked, and Kanye was everywhere you moved. It was to a point where, you know, all of the lights and power were playing on every single radio station that I was listening to. And another crazy fact about Power is that apparently he spent 5,000 hours making that song. So, you know, do you think that was just a product of him being a perfectionist, or do you think that he really wanted to get this one right more than anything?
I think he really wanted to get this one right specifically, because while he is a perfectionist, you look at 808s, and they say that they had that thing pretty much done in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Like this was not the same thing. He was putting in the time on every single song. Like you said, he said 5,000 man hours went into Power, and it was like that for every single track on this album.
Wow, yeah, and you hear the quality, because even everything from the engineering, the vocals, you know, the placement of the tracks, the track list placement, you know, from one all the way to, I believe it is. Let me just pull this on my phone real quick.
I believe that there's 13 tracks.
Yeah, I think it's 13 tracks. Let me just confirm that while I do this. But it was perfectly executed.
And
yes,
also, of course, you know, the production is a huge fucking part of this album, just because of, you know, the list of producers, which I'll actually read to you because of how impressive it is. We had Kanye himself producing, Andrew Dawson, Bink, DJ Frank E, S1, RZA, Plain Pat, No ID, Lex Luger, Mike Dean, Jeff Basker, Mike Karen, other contributors. And the most fascinating part about this to me is that he had Madlib and DJ Premier come in to make beats, and he didn't fucking use them.
Yeah, he didn't.
Tell me which other artist is going to have beats made by Madlib and DJ Premier and not put them on their album? You have to be out of your fucking mind.
Not only that, but apparently Kanye and Kendrick have a load of unreleased music with Madlib. Like, apparently they've been making music since GKMC, so who knows what's in that vault. But yes, going back to the producer list, it's absolutely incredible because, you know, Kanye has been known to produce everything in his discography. He's had a say on everything. You know, if he has to mix and engineer everything, he's a fanatic that way. And it's crazy because I feel as if this is one of the projects that he has had you know, a lot of different great minds work on. You know, Jay-Z has a lot of executive producing say on it. Apparently he had a big creative say on the album. Then you talk about what No ID did too, and then, you know, Mike Dean. This is like one of the biggest moments in Mike Dean's career and what basically shaped him. So you know, it's crazy to see what he was able to do in his past albums and how he was able to match it up. I want to ask you this, Tilly. Compare MBDTF to his 4 studio albums that released before this, and what was the biggest shift, let's say, in the track list and the aesthetic that was being presented?
Man, I mean, probably the biggest shift is really just the grandness of the album. Like, there is so much stacked into those songs. Like, you look at a song like Power with 3 different samples, and that, like, in my opinion, that is a perfect hip hop beat. Like, that is probably the peak of Kanye's production on a song like Power. But as far as the past albums, yeah, it had better features. It had really long verses from these features. Like, everyone was just putting their all into it. Yeah.
And yeah, that's a really good point that you say how, you know, he tried to make a really grand album because it's really epic in scale. Even if you look at the production itself, I mean, the amount of samples that he used for this, and not only that, but he stirred away from his usual, you know, soul sample aesthetic, and he dived into more progressive rock samples, classic samples. He even sampled movies, like just little bits of movies. And he experimented, he threw a bunch of shit together, and it worked.
I think the only soul sample that was actually on the album was from Devil in a
New Dress. Yeah, it was a Smokey.
That wasn't even him.
No. I think it was a Smokey Robinson sample.
Smokey Robinson sample, and I think Mike Dean and another producer worked on that track.
Like he didn't produce that track.
No, he
It
didn't.
was
No, he
Pink.
didn't produce that
He
track.
wasn't even the one that brought the soul sample in.
Absolutely. And you know what's a fun fact about that sample is I remember reading this. I think it was on Complex. The first time Rick Ross heard that beat, he started crying. Like the guy literally started breaking down in tears, and he's like, "This is one of the best produced songs I have ever heard." And you
That's
hear
amazing.
it because the most fascinating part about Devil in a New Dress, I feel as if, is that pause between Kanye's verse and then Rick Ross's verse, because you don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah,
Especially
you
like
don't.
imagine
There's
it's
a
like-
nice pause.
It
Yeah.
was a super nice pause because it built you up for Rick Ross's verse, and then after that, when you get that legendary Ricky Rose verse, you're left absolutely stunned. So back to the production. Another fun fact is that the only non-sampled track on the whole album is All the Lights.
And
Correct?
that's my favorite produced song on the album is
Really?
All the Lights, just
Wow.
because of all the different sounds, the trumpets, the saxophones, Elton John's piano on that song.
Yeah, nuts.
It was just I still listen to it today, and I'm amazed by what I'm hearing sonically.
How do you even engineer that?
I don't know, man.
How do you
I don't
get
know.
that
It's
through,
fucking
man?
mind-boggling.
How do you get that through? So Tilly, I want to ask you this, man. What's your favorite produced track on the whole album? So like, what's your favorite beat?
I just said it, but Power. I think Power is
Okay.
the best beat on that album.
Dude, I remember the first time hearing that song and I was fucking mind blown. It is such a complex production and I don't even know how they pulled that off.
The last beat that I want to kind of single out, of course, is Runaway, which has that amazing minimalistic piano riff from Kanye. And it seems so fucking stupid simple, but it was a heavenly, melodic piano riff. And it's so iconic, and it's something that everyone identifies Kanye with.
Yeah, and I think they identify Kanye with it just because it's never been done before like that. I mean, imagine sticking a track into the middle of your album just with one piano key, right? And you just let it rip for like 15 to 25 seconds, I believe it is. It's not like a minute long, but still it was just enough. And I feel as if it was also the perfect introduction to Pusha T. A lot of people were aware of Pusha T before this, of course, with Clips. He had a very celebrated career.
But it revitalized Pusha T's career.
It revitalized it because that song just blew up. And that's the beautiful part about My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is I feel as if it had a really positive impact on everyone that worked within it. So going on to the rest of the production, another thing that I want to say is that it's super cinematic. I feel like I'm watching a movie every time I listen to this album, just because there's so many different sounds and there's so many different emotions that are being inflicted throughout the track list. But at the same time, it's coherent and there's still that one vision being put in through it. And a question that I want to ask you is, when you're going through that album, do you feel as if there's any dip-offs throughout the track list, or do you feel as if it's just a consistent ride all the way through?
Man, I used to think that Hell of a Life was probably the one dip in the album, but after listening to it back, it's like you get Runaway. You get this extremely sad piece of music. Like, I want to speak on the production for that real quick, but I just recently got noise canceling headphones. And if you listen to the intro of Runaway with noise canceling headphones and all you can hear is that one piano note, it is just like you're in a pitch black room. Like that's what it feels like. And you just hear this piano note in the distance. It is beautiful. But I think that Hell of a Life is a really great pickup after Runaway. Kanye he's done that before on Graduation. You get stronger and then you go into I Wonder, and then he picks you right back up with Good Life. So I don't think that there's any dips on the album.
No, there's definitely. I think there's maybe a couple of songs that are weaker than others, right? Like I don't think that it's a full non-skip. I'm not gonna say that, but just the standout tracks for me alone just make this album a masterpiece. And this is the next part I want to transition into the episode is why My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is a masterpiece. A lot of people call it a masterpiece. I think it's a pretty safe bet to call it one of the best albums of the 2010 decade. I mean, in every single list I've seen, it's always been included. It's super iconic. Everything from, the 3 different album covers that you got from the Runaway movie, all the way to, the iconic tracks that we just got into. But not only that, but Kanye changed the genre again. We thought Kanye changed it once with Graduation versus Curtis. Everyone called it the gangster rap. It was all over the Complex headlines. XXL was talking about it. You know, it really shifted the music industry. Then he reinvented himself with 808s and Heartbreak, which, you know, completely influenced a generation of artists. You know, it's influenced Drake, it's influenced Take Care, The Weeknd, Frank Ocean. There's so many different people that have taken and used from 808. But what makes MBDTF different is just that I feel as if it was a big fork in the road, man. It was either you're going one way with Kanye or you're going the other. So I want to talk to you about that, Lou. You know, what was your one thing with MBDTF that really made you become a Kanye fan? Because I know it has a really super important in your listening.
Yeah, it does. And I think it was just, you know, that whole fusion of different sounds and how, you know, he captured a moment in his life with, you know, such ease. It came so easy to him. And what's crazy too is that this album has his best rapping ever, in my opinion. If you just look at the 3 verses from Gorgeous, you know, that's top tier rapping. And it just shows that if he wanted to be, you know, considered one of those, you know, lyrically driven rappers, he could be, but that's not who Kanye is. But he, you know, he's shown examples of it. Apart from that, just I feel like everything about the album is iconic, even down to the album's artwork, which we've had, you know, a bunch of different covers for. So out of all the covers that you guys have seen, which one stands out the most to you?
I'm going to let Tilly take this away. I want to see, because I need some time to think on this. I'm going to put you on the spot, man. I want to see what you got.
My favorite is definitely the Runaway one. You know, the ballerina with the green background. I love that art so much.
Actually, we're probably going to end up using one of that as a sample for our artwork for one of our thumbnails, you know, throughout our clips. That's my favorite as well. I think it's super diverse, and everything from that ballerina, because I was paying attention to it today because I was doing the designing for the episode, and I was looking at the way it was put together, and it was just like the ballerina has like this dry martini in her hand that's extended out while she's still on a pose, and then you could see that her face is in distress. And I feel as if that's another big narrative within this album is, you know, Kanye's trying to juggle so much in his life and he has so many issues, yet he has to stay proper in form with that dry martini in his hand while shit's just going wrong. And I think that's why MBDTF is a masterpiece, is because it's just a big clusterfuck, but it all makes sense at the same time. Like it operates in anarchy. It allows you to understand so many different complex ideologies while still keeping that coherent message at the same time. And not only that, but, you know, I want to talk about the album sales, because this thing did fucking great commercially. It put up 496,000 copies first week. That's impressive numbers. That's crazy. That's almost 500,000. That is 500,000, excuse me. And it also ended up spending 115 weeks on the Billboard. So do you think that this was Kanye's, maybe his most mainstream album, or do you think that this was just a product of quality and people just kept bumping it over the years?
I would say that it was probably a mix of both, because you take like Power and All of the Lights. Those were huge hits. Power I don't know as much anymore, but that was in like every movie trailer in the world had Power playing as
I remember
the music
that
for it. You know, we had Graduation, which was probably more commercially successful. I mean, that album released in 2007, and now you look at like Spotify numbers, and it's still his most streamed album. I think it's his most streamed album. Maybe Stronger is just his most streamed song, but I think that it was a combination of both. I think the quality kept people going back to it, as well as some of the hits getting the mainstream plays.
I want to move on to something else, which is very intriguing to me, because there's always that discussion of, is MBDTF the album of the 2010s decade? And, you know, there's a lot of other albums that kind of come in contention with that. And we have, you know, To Pimp a Butterfly. We have Tetsuo and Youth by Lupe Fiasco. We have Undone by The Roots. There's a lot of albums that are kind of on that level, but many people consider My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy to have that #1 spot. So I want to ask you, do you have MBDTF at #1?
Man, he's already putting me on the spot. Holy shit. Okay.
Not personal preference, but do you think it's the best album of the 2010s decade?
I'm going to have to say no. I'm going to say no for a reason. I do think To Pimp a Butterfly is the best hip hop album to ever be created. I'm a huge Kendrick fan. I will forever support Kendrick, and the reason why I put To Pimp a Butterfly at that stage is just because there is too many wild narratives behind it. Kendrick was at a time where he had to perform, or his career was going to go down the drain because people had such high expectations off of GKMC, and he came out with an album that is, in a lot of people's opinions, better than what he had before. And he dropped it in 2015. Not only that, but we could see the sort of, social awareness that he started to create with this album. I mean, listen, yes, people were doing it before. Yes, it was popular before. But if it wasn't for Kendrick, doing his Grammy performances or, sticking an album that, sold over 500,000 copies first week, I think that's the stat. Don't quote me on that.
Actually, I think it sold in the 300 margin, actually.
It was over. No, I think that was GKMC.
No, GKMC was like 250 around, and I think T-Pab was in like the
okay,
350
no, Damn was 650. Damn was 650.
Damn was around 600.
Damn was 650. The reason why I think The Pimp a Butterfly is the best album of all time, especially in the 2010 decade, is just because what it's done for the genre. Now we've seen the time it's aged, and there's not a single flaw in that album. Everything from the live band instrumentals, to Kendrick's performances, to the skits, all the messages that are being conveyed. It's just, for me, it's the perfect hip hop album.
It broke boundaries, but so did MBDTF in a sense.
No, I do, but that's my second.
Yeah.
That would be my second.
Okay, fair enough.
The thing is that as a Kendrick fan, that's my uttermost respect. That's the album that really got me. Like the album that sort of introduces you to a psychotic level of love for hip hop. So that's why I think that album's a 2010. But listen, if that never released, then it's a clear winner. It's definitely
fair enough.
So I want to ask you, do you think it's the best?
I would not put it as the best. I would definitely have it in my top 5. But my number one album of the 2010s decade is a Kendrick album, but it's GKMC rather than T-Pab. Just because, how it recreated the gangsta genre and how, it brought us cinematic storytelling like we've never seen before. But, MBDTF, you can make a big argument for it being number one.
Oh, absolutely.
And Tilly, I want to ask you, do you have it as your number one album of the 2010s decade?
I do have it as my number
awesome.
one. T-Bab is my number 2. I mean, dude, the first time I listened to that album, my mind was blown.
It's amazing, man.
This is just art. This is perfect, what I'm listening to. I think I have My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy over it just because I'm a lot bigger on production than really intricate stories in hip-hop, but I still really appreciate that album. I think it was the second best of the decade for sure.
And it's definitely the head-to-head because, if you look at both those albums, they fit every criteria. We get insane performances by both artists themselves. The productions on the album, it depends what you like in hip-hop, right? If you're more towards, jazz samples and more towards live instrumental, then obviously you're on one side. But if you're more into, that uplifting, that more lavish production, that luxury talk, that sort of stuff, you're more on the Kanye side of things. But I think it's safe to say that both of those are like the 1 and 2. It's like the LeBron and Michael Jordan type of conversation.
And My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy has to be in the conversation just because, like I said, it broke boundaries like many of Kanye's albums have. And apart from that, he brought in these unconventional samples, which artists such as Tyler the Creator, Kendrick Lamar, Logic, J. Cole started adapting to years to come. So it has had a big part of, influencing future generations. And for that reason, I think that it deserves to be in contention for being the best album.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's definitely the 1-2 punch. And, going back onto the aspects of the album, one thing that I really want to talk about is the features on this album, right? I mentioned this before, and, MBDTF is so famous for its features, dude. We got so many of them. So, Tilly, straight off the bat, I'm going to ask you, what's your favorite feature on the album, and why is it your favorite?
Oh, geez. It's close probably between Rick Ross on Devil in a New Dress and maybe Push on either Runaway or his So Appalled verse.
Oh, okay.
I think those are my big 3 personally.
Okay, why would you say so? What makes them your top 3? Compared to, let's say, Kid Cudi's gorgeous appearance, or Nicki Minaj's Monster. What really puts
or even Raekwon and Gorgeous. He fucking killed his verse too.
He does. Pusha on Runaway, that is just it fits the song so well. He does such a great job delivering that story. And when you listen to his story, while he was trying to make that album, and Kanye screaming at him. Well, not screaming, but he's like, dude, we need more douchebag on this album. Like, you're going through a breakup right now, but we need more from you. And then Rick Ross, just a legendary verse, dude. That thing is truly amazing. And then Push for me is probably just the standout of So Appalled. And I really like that verse.
Yeah, no, it definitely revitalized his career and it made him get into a different zone. I'm going to have to go with Rick Ross. I mean, right now my listening with Rick Ross is a bit split 50-50. I mean, I listen to some of his stuff. I think his older stuff is much better. Port of Miami and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's untouchable.
But Rather You Than Me was also great.
Yeah, it was good. Like, I'm talking like more like now. Like his album that he released in 2019. I can't remember it off the top.
Port of Miami 2?
It was Port of Miami 2.
It was weak. It was a weak effort.
It was a weaker track. But Rick Ross on Devil in a New Dress it's breathtaking, bro. Like, you don't even understand what's going on. And my second would probably have to be Nicki Minaj on Monster. Actually, a funny story is that once Nicki Minaj actually sent Kanye the beat, hold on, let me rephrase this. Once Kanye got the verse, he called Nicki Minaj and he was like, I don't know if I should include this on the album just because you might have the best feature on this album. And people know how iconic.
Not only the best feature, but the best verse on the whole album. Goodness.
But people know how iconic it is because it was so different, right? She came in with this super grimy monster delivery, and then after
she's grunting in the song, man. It's so vicious and it's so uncalled for.
Yeah.
And it just fucking shook people to their bones because they didn't expect that at all. And going back to Rick Ross, that's also my favorite feature off of the album, just because to me, that's the epitome of, a great luxury verse, as he goes into detail on, his Mercedes sedan and, his attire, everything. It's so detailed. And, it wasn't a situation where his first verse landed. He actually did a verse and Kanye told him, I know you could do better than that. And the same strategy worked on Nicki Minaj, and then we get two of the best features in hip-hop history. And not only do I think that, Rick Ross's verse is the best feature on the album, I think it's his best verse of all time.
Definitely.
In his whole career.
I think it is too.
And when he finished writing and recording his final verse for Devil in a New Dress, he apparently shed tears.
Yeah.
Like, he couldn't fucking believe that Kanye pushed him to deliver this incredible verse.
Well, I think that's another great aspect about Kanye, right? Because now we're on the topic about features. Like, this guy has been working with some of the industry's best, right? Like, he was working on La Familia with the whole Rockefeller crew, Jay-Z. Then after that, he had production credits on The Blueprint. Then he got on to doing the Black Album. Then he did Be by Common. Like, this guy has worked with some of the industry's best perfectionists, and when it comes to his album, it's nothing short of that. He expects the best from you. And another low-key feature I actually want to talk about is Jay-Z on So Appalled. I think it's so fucking sick the way he goes into his bag on this one. And it's probably my standout track on the whole thing. And it's kind of sad because this is low-key one of the last times you sort of see them collab together before Watch the Throne, right? Like, after that, they kind of had that whole downward spiral. And, Tilly, I want to ask you something. Do you think that Jay-Z and Kanye would still be collaborating together to this day if it wasn't for that whole feud?
Jeez, okay. So let's think. Did they have a song together past Watch the Throne or Cruel Summer? Any of that? I don't think he wasn't on Yeezus. He wasn't on The Life of Pablo, and wasn't the. Are you talking about the marriage feud? Is that what started all of this? That they would never.
Well, whatever fallout they had, I'm talking about it generally. That could be. We could discuss that another time. But that whole feud of the 2010 decade, we all know that he had a fallout. But by the way, they're still on really good terms. Like, Jay-Z came out and said that that's his little brother. Like, they just had a fallout and shit. And it's nothing really that stressful. But there was definitely creative sort of. Boundaries between them, if I could put it like that. And apparently, when they were making Watch the Throne, there was a lot of shit that they didn't agree on creatively, and I feel as if they were just growing apart as artists. And, I'm going to answer my own question. I don't think that they would be collaborating right now, because you could see the lane that Jay-Z went in, and you could see what Kanye's trying to be doing right now. And I don't know if the sounds would mix or not.
And yeah, and I think that kind of plays into, how Kanye is, transcending his sound into a totally different aesthetic now with, the Christian gospel music. And I have to say that I kind of respect him for it. I mean, a lot of people aren't, big on Jesus is King and, that kind of style. But, it's a new chapter in Kanye's career, and I'm kind of embracing it just because he's given me such a complete discography, such a great catalog that I'm happy with what I have. And I just want him to make the music that he wants to make at the end of the day.
For sure.
Yeah, I guess going off that point, yeah, sometimes I completely forget that we're in this like new era of Kanye where it's like gospel music. So I guess, yeah, today at least, he probably wouldn't be collabing with Jay. I know that he's tried to, at least in 2018, he was like, Dave, Watch the Throne 2 coming soon, stuff like that. And asking Jay to, I think with Donda, he said, we need like artists like me and Drake. We need the people who gave us our careers to start all of our albums. He's like, Lil Wayne, you need to start Drake's album. Jay-Z, you need to start my album. So Kanye's kind of pushing for it, but I could totally see them not making music anymore.
No, for sure. And I feel as if Jay-Z's also in a very calculated bag right now. I mean, he's worked on 444, but either in that, he's only worked on a written testimony by Jay Electronica. I feel as if those are the only two projects that we've gotten from him, and they were both two very concentrated projects. Because you could low-key call Jay Electronica as a written testimony, a joint album with Jay-Z.
He's on almost every track. So.
Absolutely. And, some people do argue that he did out-rap Jay Electronica. I don't agree with that, but that's a conversation for another day. One thing that I really want to dive into before we end this episode is the hidden messages between in MBDTF. There's a lot of stuff that flies over people's head because of the extravagant, producing and, the crazy features, the bangers, but there is a lot of content matter in here. And one of the craziest things is that, Kanye is always personal on his albums, and he was just as personal on this one. So Lou, take us through a couple of these messages and, what do these messages, let's say, mean to your hip hop listening now?
So for me, kind of the main concept that I took out of this album was just, Kanye's self-reflection on how fame has impacted him and shaped him as an individual, and kind of, both sides of fame in the sense of what is it like if I fully indulge myself into this fame, into this notoriety, and then the other side of it is, what are the pitfalls of, completely immersing yourself into this, this lifestyle of being a famous rapper? What are the pitfalls and what are the strong points? And I think that something that kind of flies over a lot of people's heads is the alternate cover where we have Kanye's decapitated head with a sword next to it. And to me, that kind of represented the media ripping him apart and cutting him to shreds. And that was the leftover, was Kanye's head. And I think the message behind that was that no matter what you do to him, no matter how much you try to tear him apart, his creative genius will always be there.
And it will always be alive. And, I got to agree with you on that. He put on a show. He put on cinematic value. He added so much into this album. I feel as if, he gave every single inch of, every single breath and every single drip of blood that he has in him into this album. He left it all in the studio. It came out crazy. And Tilly, I'm going to ask you that same question, man. There's a lot of hidden messages in here, but what's one that you really take away? And what's one that really sticks with you?
Oh, for sure, Runaway, because the hidden message behind that is you have at the surface level, like it's about being a douchebag to a girl that you really care about and all that stuff, but also the kind of like hidden meaning of it is Kanye's relationship with the public, and it's a lot about how he doesn't know how to say the things that he wants to say. He doesn't know how to get his point across in the most effective way, and that is just applicable throughout his career. Like you see it today all the time. It's like this one message from My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy that carries over throughout probably what's going to be the rest of Kanye's career.
Yeah, not only that, but you have songs like Hell of a Life where he's talking about marrying a porn star. Ironically so, he ends up marrying a porn star. And then you have Blame Game, which explains, the whole feud between him and Amber Rose. One of my favorite standout tracks that has a really hidden message for me, something that I interpret as Dark Fantasy. I think it's one of Kanye's biggest victory laps ever. When I'm in the car, I'm bumping this, and I'm bumping it at full capacity, but he's sort of giving you the imagery of himself being in Chicago and, sort of manifesting this lifestyle that he's gotten into. And it's crazy to see because he talks about, fantasizing this back in Chicago, and you look at him and you're like, wow, this guy has literally came from nothing and has built, to this day, which is $1 billion empire. He's officially a billionaire and shit. So that's what's crazy about Kanye West, is that he has came from nothing and he was able to deliver one of the greatest albums to ever grace hip hop, because you could probably say that too, So I love the album. There's a lot of hidden messages behind it. Talk about the great production, talk about the great features, talk about the great moments with the album. Everything's aligned with it, I love it.
There is one more thing that I want to touch on before we close off the episode, and that's just, because it's been 10 years, we can kind of start seeing what the influence of this album, has had on the culture. And we can also compare it to the influence that 808s and Heartbreaks has had on the culture. So I want to start by asking Tilly, which album between 808s and MBDTF do you think has had more influence on hip-hop?
I got to give it to 808s, because if you look at just the people that it's inspired, like you got Drake at the forefront of that. Drake is like a superstar. He is the biggest name in hip hop right now, likely for the foreseeable future. I don't know if anyone's ever going to overtake the pure commercial power of Drake. Like he gets on somebody's track and that thing's probably going number 10. It'll probably give that artist their first number 10 on the Billboard that they've ever had. So, and then you got like Juice WRLD directly saying like, Kanye's like a time traveler, man. He went to 2015 and came back with some sauce when he was talking about 808s. So I think it inspired like a true new generation of hip hop artists. And at the forefront of that is Drake, who is just a megastar.
I'm going to have to agree with Tilly. I do think it's 808. I don't think it's a better album, obviously, than My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, but if we're talking about influence alone, then there is a clear winner on that. It is 808s. There is, as Tilly said before, there are so many artists that have been inspired by this, and I think the most inspiring thing by this is that, Kanye showed that vulnerable side of him. He was showing that, you could dip into different aesthetics and still deliver a really coherent and sellable hip-hop album. And it broke that narrative of it being like, yeah, you can't talk about your personal shit, or you can't talk about this, or you can't put in this aesthetic into albums anymore. You can't do this if you want to sell. Just completely shattered that all with 808s. And not only that, but when I listened to the album, you could hear so many different aesthetics that I hear now. Like there are so many artists that are, I wouldn't say biting, but that directly sample, let's say different instruments or different synths or, different vocal complexions, whatever it is, man. You could hear that influence in some of the most prominent artists to this day. So Lou, I'm going to leave you the floor, man. What do you think it is?
Yeah, I got to agree with you guys. I think overall from what we've seen, 808s is a clear winner, and it has had more influence, at least on this generation, because of, all the implementation of auto-tune and, just like you said, bringing that raw emotion into the album. But MBDTF, for its own merits, it's influenced a lot of people to think outside of the box when it comes to production. And I think that many people can try to replicate and make a good version of 808s, but no one can ever replicate what Kanye did with MBDTF. I don't think anyone can ever do that.
No, I don't think so either. And it's funny because MBDTF is such a wordful, man. We've been saying it 15 times over in this episode, but it's a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece that will never be replicated. The quality on the album is unprecedented, and it's an album that's going to stick with generations to come. So listen, this is the end of the episode. It was a fantastic session talking to you guys about this. It's one of my favorite albums. I know it's a favorite for you and you as well. And Tilly, listen, I'm going to leave you the floor, man. So talk about you and talk about your page on Twitter.
All right. So main thing I can say is if you're interested in seeing a bunch of Kanye stuff, like in-depth threads, I had one that was like Kanye finishes his album at the last minute because he is just such a huge procrastinator. Just really interesting stuff like that. If you want to see it, go check out the Twitter. I'm going to move into YouTube and streaming later on, probably in the coming weeks, but for sure, go to the Twitter. That is where you'll find like the hub of all my information.
Yeah, Tilly's an awesome dude, man. I always go through your content. I'm always amazed at how crazy you could get into detail with some Kanye material. It's absolutely nuts, man. There's some crazy Kanye fans out there, and I think that was officially solidified with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. So this is the end of the show, and if you guys have not already, subscribe, hit the notification tab, and you guys could expect an episode from us every Friday from now on, and we roll out the clips like we said before. Not only that, but thank you for the the reception that we got on the last episode, top 10 J. Cole songs with Team Dreamville. Guys, it's been a pleasure. It's My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy's 10th anniversary. And listen, Kanye's a legend, man. We're still talking about it to this day.